The Nevada sun burned low in the sky, stretching shadows over the wooden stands of the county auction yard. The air was thick with dust and the sound of boots scuffing dirt. Spurs jingled softly, and a low hum of conversation filled the space as another horse was led into the ring. But when he arrived, the noise fell away completely. The massive black stallion entered like a coming storm. His muscles were thick and powerful, marked by torn scars along his side, and his eyes were as dark as coal. He didn't trot. He seemed to challenge the very ground beneath his feet. From the railing, Bo Jenkins watched with crossed arms. "There comes the devil himself," he muttered. "They call him Cole." On the bottom row of the bleachers, a young boy named Benji Rhodes stood, just tall enough to see over the gate. His blonde hair was messy, and his small hand was held tightly by his mother, Helen Preston. "Benji, don't stare like that," she whispered, her voice tense. But Benji didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on Cole, not with fear, but with a quiet, deep focus. The stallion circled in the dirt, nostrils flaring, his hooves pounding like distant war drums. A handler tried to guide him toward the center of the pen, but Cole reared back violently, nearly snapping the laid rope. A gasp swept through the crowd. The auctioneer shook his head, wiping sweat from his brow. "No bids," he called out without much hope. No surprise there. But then Benji let go of his mother's hand. Without a word, he slipped under the lowest fence rail and walked straight into the pen. Shouts and gasps erupted from the stands. Bo yelled, starting to climb down. Helen stood frozen, pale and trembling as her son kept walking. His small boots tapped softly in the dust until he stood just a few feet from Cole. The stallion went still. His chest heaved with heavy breaths, his ears twitched, and his tail lashed once. Slowly, Benji raised his hand, palm open, reaching toward the towering animal's face. The crowd held its breath. For a moment, it seemed Cole might lunge. Instead, he lowered his head and let the boy's hand rest gently against his forehead. A deep silence settled over the yard. Cole closed his eyes. Benji closed his too. Something passed between them, something invisible but deeply felt by everyone watching. In that moment, the monster became still. Before the dust had settled, two ranch hands jumped into the pen, ropes ready to pull Benji to safety. But the instant their boots hit the ground, Cole let out a deep, warning snort. He stepped protectively in front of the boy, planting himself like a living wall between Benji and the men. The handlers froze. Bo Jenkins barked from the sidelines, but even his voice lacked conviction. Cole didn't look mad. He looked alert, aware, and strangely calm. Benji turned his head toward the men and spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "He doesn't want to hurt anyone." The words seemed impossible, a child claiming to know the thoughts of a beast that had terrified grown men. Yet no one moved, not even Helen, who stood trembling outside the rail, unable to call out. Dr. Marvin Blake had been standing quietly at the back of the crowd, arms folded, eyes narrowed behind old wire-framed glasses. Now he stepped forward. "Let the boy be," he said with authority. "Cole isn't showing aggression." The handlers hesitated, then lowered their ropes. The crowd murmured, confused and shaken. Dr. Blake entered the pen carefully and approached Helen. Helen could barely nod. Her mind was reeling. She hadn't come here to adopt anything, especially not a dangerous animal like Cole. She had only come to sell an old saddle from her late husband Ray's barn, the last piece of his past she was ready to part with. But now her boy was touching the forehead of a beast no one could control, as if it were a gentle pony. Ray would have understood this, she thought. From the far end of the stands, a girl about Benji's age watched silently. Sadie Monroe didn't smile or gasp like the others. Her brown eyes were sharp and still. She'd seen horses her whole life, but never anything like this. A look of recognition, or maybe deep curiosity, passed over her face. She would remember this moment forever. Cole finally lowered his head all the way to the ground and exhaled. Benji stepped back and looked up at the people watching. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Everyone there knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Back at the barn behind the auction house, Cole was led without resistance into a separate stall, far from the other horses. The handlers looked uneasy, unsure if the calm was real or temporary. Bo Jenkins tossed the laid rope aside with a grunt. "That horse is playing tricks." Dr. Blake stayed behind, scribbling notes on a worn clipboard, stealing quiet glances at Cole through the wooden slats. There was something different in the horse's eyes now, not the rage he'd seen before. Helen sat with Benji on a hay bale outside the barn, brushing dirt from his jeans. "You scared me half to death," she said, trying to sound stern but failing. Benji didn't respond immediately. He stared at the barn door, listening to Cole snort softly inside. "He's not bad, Mama," Benji finally whispered. Helen felt a chill at his words, at the certainty in his voice. Dr. Blake approached and crouched beside them. "I've seen a lot of horses in my time," he said to Helen. "None like that. Whatever happened between that boy and Cole, it's something I can't explain. But I can tell you this, if someone doesn't claim him, they'll put him down." Helen stiffened. The doctor didn't answer right away. "I'm saying he already did," he said, nodding toward Benji. That night, Helen lay awake in the small bedroom of the trailer they were living in temporarily. Since losing Ray, sleep had been hard to find. She stared at the ceiling fan spinning above and thought about everything. The move, the money troubles, her husband's quiet strength. And now this horse, Cole, a living storm suddenly soothed by her son's touch. It didn't make sense. But then again, very little had since Ray died. Maybe that was the point. Benji was asleep in the next room, arms wrapped around a stuffed bear missing one ear. In his dreams, he was running, not away from something, but toward it. There was wind in his hair and thunder beneath his feet, and always beside him, a dark shadow keeping pace, not chasing, just running with him. By morning, the decision was made. Helen signed the papers just after sunrise, her hands shaking slightly as she wrote her name. The auction staff didn't question it. They were just glad to see Cole leave without incident. But as the trailer rolled away, Bo Jenkins leaned against the fence, eyes narrowed. "A horse like that doesn't just change," he muttered. And he wasn't wrong. The trailer bumped gently down the gravel road toward what was left of the Preston family ranch. Dry fences, an empty barn, and fields that hadn't seen crops in years. Helen drove in silence, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds, catching glimpses of Cole inside the hitched trailer. He stood still, watching, always watching. Benji sat beside her, knees pulled to his chest. He wasn't afraid, just quiet, as if waiting for something to begin. When they arrived, Cole didn't resist being led into the old corral behind the barn. The wooden gate creaked shut, and Helen double-checked the lock more out of habit than doubt. Benji leaned on the fence, his eyes steady on the stallion. "He doesn't like the dark," he said out of nowhere. Helen looked over, startled. Benji shrugged. His voice was flat, matter of fact, not playful or imaginative, just certain. Inside the house, Helen microwaved soup while glancing out the window every minute or two. The wind had picked up, rattling the screen door, and something about the way the clouds moved unsettled her. Ray had always said animals felt storms before people did. She wondered what he would have said about a boy who could feel storms inside animals. The thought made her chest tighten. She missed him more tonight than she had in months. That night Cole didn't sleep. Neither did Benji. Around midnight, Helen found her son sitting on the porch steps in his pajamas, a blanket over his shoulders, staring out toward the barn. She asked softly, crouching beside him. Benji nodded. "He's scared." Helen didn't ask how he knew that anymore. She simply wrapped the blanket tighter around him and sat beside him in the silence. Suddenly, from the darkness, a sharp, hollow bang echoed from inside the barn. Helen shot up, heart pounding. Cole let out a deep, anxious snort. She grabbed a flashlight and rushed toward the barn, Benji close behind. Inside, tools had fallen. A pitchfork was on the ground. Nothing was stolen or broken, but Cole was pacing restlessly in his corral, eyes wide and wild. Something had disturbed him, and it hadn't come from outside. Doctor, she had claimed him. But now, in the flickering flashlight beam, staring into Cole's trembling eyes, Helen felt it. This wasn't going to be easy. Whatever bond existed between her son and this horse, it came with a weight. And something, she realized, was still hiding beneath Cole's silence. Morning light filtered through the cracks in the barn wall, soft and golden. Cole stood quiet in his corral, his massive body still, but his ears twitched with every sound. Benji arrived just after sunrise, carrying a bucket of water and a few sliced apples. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He moved slowly, calmly, and waited. Cole stepped forward, lowering his head to sniff Benji's open hand before gently nudging his chest. That was the first time the stallion allowed a touch without hesitation. It felt like a beginning. Helen watched from the porch, arms crossed. Her mind raced with questions she didn't yet know how to ask. Something about this bond went beyond chance. Cole had been vicious, violent, unreachable. And now this, a boy and a horse moving together like they'd known each other in another life. What unsettled Helen more was the way Cole responded to Benji specifically. Not to her, not to anyone else, just to him, as if he recognized him. Later that day, Dr. Marvin Blake pulled up in his dusty pickup. He carried a leather folder under one arm and a look of concern on his face. "I've been digging through some of the paperwork from Cole's seizure," he told Helen. He opened the folder to reveal an old, faded intake form from the county animal control office. Helen froze. She repeated, her voice cracking on her husband's name. Dr. Blake nodded slowly. "I think it means Ray Preston." She stepped back, her breath catching. "That's not possible. Ray's horse was named Dusty. He raised him from a foal." But a shadow passed over her face. They went to the barn. Dr. Blake scanned Cole's body, lifting his mane gently until he found what he was looking for. A faint brand, half-healed, half-burned, almost invisible. But once cleaned, the initials were clear. RP. Helen stared at them, speechless. Her husband's brand on a horse she had never seen before. The realization hit like a punch to the chest. "Ray knew this horse," she whispered. Benji stood beside them, eyes wide but calm. "He's not just scared," Benji said quietly. Dr. Blake and Helen looked at him. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying dust across the dry land. In that dust, Helen could almost see Ray standing tall by the fence, arms crossed, watching. Cole wasn't just a rescue, he was a message left behind. But from whom and why? That night, Helen sat alone at the kitchen table. The brand RP burned into her memory as sharply as it had been burned into Cole's skin. She stared at an old photo of Ray in his saddle, smiling, the reins of a horse in his hand, but it wasn't Dusty. The horse in the photo had darker eyes, a thicker mane, and a barely visible scar over its left shoulder. Her hands trembled as she brought the photo closer. Had she seen him before and never realized? Had Ray hidden him on purpose? Outside in the moonlight, Benji stood barefoot in the barn, a blanket draped over his shoulders. Cole was awake, pacing, more restless than usual. His heavy hooves stirred the dirt and the air felt tense. Benji stepped into the corral slowly. "It's okay," he whispered. Cole stopped. He turned his head slowly toward the boy, and for the first time Benji saw it, a single tear falling down the horse's dark cheek, cutting a path through the dust. The next morning, Dr. Marvin Blake returned with a stack of old files. "There's something else," he said to Helen. "Ray volunteered for a rescue mission 5 years ago up north near the wildfire zones. He was helping evacuate horses from a collapsed stable." Helen nodded. She remembered that trip. Ray had come back changed, quieter, withdrawn, and she now understood why. Cole must have been one of the survivors, Dr. Blake added. But no one knew. Benji listened quietly from the hallway. He didn't interrupt. He just watched his mother's eyes as the pieces started falling into place. Helen sat back, stunned. "He brought Cole home," she murmured. Dr. Blake hesitated, maybe because he couldn't tame him. Helen covered her face with her hands, trying to hold back the tide of emotions. Later that afternoon, while the wind howled across the fields, Cole began to thrash, kicking and rearing. His body panicked, wild again. Benji ran to the barn and found the horse drenched in sweat, eyes wide with terror. "It's happening again," Benji said, breathing hard. Helen arrived seconds later, yelling for Dr. Blake as Cole crashed against the wooden posts. "He's reliving it," Blake muttered. But in the middle of the storm, Benji stepped forward. No rope, no bridle, just his voice. "You're not there anymore," he said softly. Cole stopped mid-kick, froze, his chest heaving. His eyes locked on Benji's, and then he dropped to his knees. Cole's massive body trembled as he knelt in the dirt, sides heaving, eyes wide and glassy. Benji didn't move. He simply crouched beside him, placing both hands gently on the horse's neck. "It's okay," he whispered. Helen stood frozen at the barn door, heart pounding. Dr. Blake approached slowly, his voice low. "He's not having a panic attack." The air inside the barn was thick with dust and tension, as if the past had materialized in smoke. Cole remained down for nearly a minute, then slowly stood, legs shaky. His breathing slowed. He turned his head and pressed his forehead gently against Benji's shoulder. Helen had seen horses bow, had seen them obey, but this looked like surrender. A release, the breaking of chains she hadn't known was still wrapped around his soul. "He trusted Ray," she whispered to herself. Sadie Monroe stood silently outside the barn, clutching the gate with small, pale hands. She had come by on her bike, curious. She had heard the story spreading through town about the boy and the black horse, but seeing it in person was different. The way Cole moved around Benji wasn't natural. It was intimate, as if they shared the same scar. Her eyes locked on Benji's, and though he hadn't seen her yet, she felt like he knew she was there. Later that evening, Helen found an old metal box tucked beneath a pile of Ray's tools in the workshop. Inside were journals, maps, and a photo. Cole, but younger, scar-free, standing beside Ray in the ashes of a burnt field. Helen's breath caught. Ray hadn't hidden Cole out of shame. He had been protecting him, and maybe, in a way, preparing Benji. Back in the barn, Benji brushed Cole's back slowly, whispering stories, not commands, not training, just talking like to a friend. Cole stood still, listening. And then, without being led, the horse walked toward the gate, stopped, and waited. "He wants to go outside," Benji said. Helen hesitated. Benji shook his head. As the gate opened and Cole stepped into the open field, something changed in the air. The setting sun lit his dark coat in orange fire. For the first time since coming to the ranch, he ran, not wild, not afraid, but free. And Benji ran beside him. The sound of hooves echoed across the field as Cole galloped under the fading orange sky, his mane flying like a flag behind him. Benji kept pace for a few seconds before falling into a quiet jog, watching with a wide, peaceful smile. Helen leaned on the fence, arms folded, heart pounding not with fear but with awe. "He's not just healed," she whispered. For a few minutes the world was quiet. No past, no scars, just the present, glowing and golden. But not everyone shared that peace. From across the road, behind the shadow of a large oak tree, Bo Jenkins stood with narrowed eyes. He hadn't come for a visit, he had come to watch, and what he saw made his gut twist. "That horse shouldn't be running loose," he muttered. Bo turned, climbed into his truck, and drove off with dust in his wake. He didn't trust miracles, especially ones he couldn't explain. The next morning, Helen received a knock on her door. It was Sheriff Cole Watson, tall and soft-spoken, with a look of concern carved into the lines of his weathered face. "Got a call," he said gently. Helen stiffened. She asked. The sheriff didn't answer directly. "I know what happened at that auction. Folks are talking, some are calling it a gift." He let the sentence hang. Benji stood behind his mother, listening but not afraid. "Cole would never hurt me," he said simply. Sheriff Watson looked down at him, then back at Helen. "I believe you," he said, "but the county might not." Helen didn't need him to finish. She knew exactly what would happen. Later that afternoon, Dr. Blake returned to perform a full exam on Cole, documenting every movement, every breath, every muscle reaction. "He's still got trauma," he told Helen, "but the aggression, it's gone. If anything, this horse is overly protective of Benji." He paused, scribbling notes. "But I can write all the reports I want." As the sun dipped low again, Benji sat beside Cole in the field, drawing in the dirt with a stick. He drew a horse, then a boy, then a fence, and then he carefully erased the fence. Cole snorted, nudging his shoulder. Benji smiled. "We're not done yet," he said softly. And they weren't, because something was coming, and this time trust alone might not be enough. 3 days later, an envelope arrived, thick and official-looking, stamped with a county seal. Helen opened it on the porch, hands already trembling. Inside, a letter informed her that a formal complaint had been filed regarding the dangerous animal on her property. An evaluation would be conducted within 72 hours. If the horse was deemed a public threat, Cole would be seized. "It's happening," she whispered. Benji stood nearby, a silent witness to the unraveling. His face didn't change, he didn't cry or yell. Helen crouched to meet his eyes. Dr. Blake arrived within the hour, already informed by the sheriff. He brought papers, video evidence of Benji and Cole interacting, and a statement prepared to argue Cole's rehabilitation. "I'll do everything I can," he told Helen. That night the house felt heavier than usual. Benji didn't eat. Cole barely moved from the back of the field, as if he sensed what was coming. Helen watched the two from the kitchen window, the pain in her chest growing deeper. She thought of Ray, how he'd fought so hard to protect this horse from whatever he'd seen in those wildfires. Now it was her turn, and she didn't know if she was strong enough. Just after midnight, headlights cut across the dirt road. A black pickup truck pulled up, and Bo Jenkins stepped out, slow and deliberate. He didn't bring a weapon, but his words were heavy. "I know what's in that letter," he said, "and I know how this ends. You think you're helping that boy, you're not." Helen's jaw tightened. He hesitated, then nodded and left without another word. But the damage was done. The next morning, Benji was gone. Helen found his note on the kitchen table, scribbled in pencil. "He doesn't deserve to be locked up again." Panic gripped her chest as she ran outside. Cole's corral was open. Both were gone, only hoof prints in the dirt pointed to the hills beyond the property. Dr. Blake arrived minutes later, followed by Sheriff Watson. "He's just a kid," Helen cried. "And that horse," but Watson shook his head. "If anyone's safe out there, it's Benji." Still, the reality was clear. Authorities were coming. And now the boy and the horse were gone, vanished into the wild. The search began before dawn. Sheriff Watson organized a group of volunteers, locals on horseback, flashlights cutting through the early fog. Helen rode with them, her heart in her throat, calling Benji's name through the hills. Every tree looked the same. Every silence felt endless, but she kept moving. Hours passed, and then a sound, a low, rhythmic drumming, distant but growing louder. Hoofbeats. Helen turned just as a black figure emerged from between the trees. Cole running fast. And on his back, Benji. No saddle, no bridle, just a boy holding on like he'd been born in the saddle. The search party froze as the pair galloped past and slowed to a graceful stop near the barn. Dust rose around them. No one spoke. Benji slid off and ran to his mother, eyes wide but proud. "I found his place," he said breathlessly. "He took me there up the ridge near the fire line. There's a clearing, quiet, he remembered it." Helen dropped to her knees and hugged him tight. Cole stood still, watching them with calm eyes. His body was steady, his breathing even. He wasn't running from anything anymore. He had led Benji home. By afternoon, the county officials arrived, clipboards in hand, ready to seize a dangerous animal. But they weren't expecting what they found. Video evidence, community testimonials, a horse standing calmly among children, and a boy who refused to be separated. Sheriff Watson stepped forward. "You came for a problem," he said plainly. Dr. Blake handed over every medical record, every file, and spoke with quiet authority. "Cole isn't the danger," he said. "He's the one who was rescued." The officials, caught between policy and proof, did something unexpected. They paused, reviewed, and then nodded. Helen could barely breathe. It was enough. That evening, the ranch was calm. Helen sat on the porch watching Benji brush Cole in the golden light. Sadie Monroe rode up on her bike holding 2 apples. She didn't say much. She just handed one to Benji and fed the other to Cole. No fences, no fear. Just trust, and as the sun dipped behind the Nevada hills, Helen finally understood what Ray had seen all those years ago. Sometimes the most broken ones are just waiting for someone brave enough to touch the pain. And when they do, something wild becomes something whole. If you felt the connection in this story, make sure you subscribe for more tales of courage and unexpected bonds. Give this video a like if it moved you, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light. Sound: a low, rhythmic drumming, distant but growing louder, hoofbeats. Helen turned just as a black figure emerged from between the trees, Cole running fast. And on his back, Benji, no saddle, no bridle, just a boy holding on like he'd been born in the saddle. The search party froze as the pair galloped past and slowed to a graceful stop near the barn. Dust rose around them. No one spoke. Benji slid off and ran to his mother, eyes wide but proud. "I found his place," he said breathlessly. "He took me there up the ridge near the fire line. There's a clearing. Quiet." He remembered it. That's where Ray brought him after the fire. Helen dropped to her knees and hugged him tight. Cole stood still, watching them with calm eyes. His body was steady, his breathing even. He wasn't running from anything anymore. He had led Benji home. By afternoon, the county officials arrived, clipboards in hand, ready to seize a dangerous animal. But they weren't expecting what they found. Video evidence, community testimonials, a horse standing calmly among children, and a boy who refused to be separated. Sheriff Watson stepped forward. "You came for a problem," he said plainly. "What you're looking at is a partnership, one that saved both of them." Dr. Blake handed over every medical record, every file, and spoke with quiet authority. "Cole isn't the danger," he said. "He's the one who was rescued. And that boy, he's the only reason the horse survived long enough to show us who he really is." The officials, caught between policy and proof, did something unexpected. They paused, reviewed, and then nodded. "He stays," one of them said, "but with annual evaluations." Helen could barely breathe. It was enough. That evening, the ranch was calm. Helen sat on the porch watching Benji brush Cole in the golden light. Sadie Monroe rode up on her bike holding 2 apples. She didn't say much. She just handed one to Benji and fed the other to Cole. No fences, no fear. Just trust. And as the sun dipped behind the Nevada hills, Helen finally understood what Ray had seen all those years ago. Sometimes the most broken ones are just waiting for someone brave enough to touch the pain. And when they do, something wild becomes something whole. If you felt the connection in this story, make sure you subscribe for more tales of courage and unexpected bonds. Give this video a like if it moved you, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light.